everybody. I wanted to make one more invitation to you guys. One of the things that's really important to us, and that as we think about discipling our children, especially those of us with kids, that discipling our children is not just something that we bring our kids to church on Sunday morning and we let the church disciple them, but it's something that we do as a community, that we disciple our children together, that we as parents are involved in our own children's discipleship. And so I wanted to make the invitation to those parents who are not currently serving in our kids' ministry in any capacity to consider serving once a month or once every couple of months as a way of being involved in your own child's discipleship. To know what is going on, what are my children being taught. I think that's important for us as parents to know what our children are being taught. And so I want to invite you to be involved in your own child's discipleship by serving on a Sunday morning with the kids ministry. That can be in the room, kind of as a room assistant. That can be in the hallway, kind of helping monitoring the hall. That can be check-in. But I think in some way being involved in that is something that I'm beginning to do, and I want to invite you to do. So everybody has a card on your desk. If you are interested in doing that, would like to do that, I want to invite you to put your name on that. Check the box that says, I'd like to serve with Kids City, and Sydney will follow up with you. But just thinking, how important it is for us to know what our kids are being taught and how they're being discipled and how we as parents are involved in that work. So I wanted to invite you to do that. So this morning we are continuing our series in 1 Samuel, the rise of a king. And this week we are really looking at the story of a man who is waiting on God. He is waiting on God to show up. He is beginning to feel under a lot of pressure with the situation that he is in and the circumstances he is under, and he's beginning to ask the question that many of us at some point in our life have asked, which is, where is God? Where's God? And so in this story, Saul is trying to trust God, but the pressure is mounting, the perceived danger is growing, the fear of God not coming through for him is building, and he's beginning to wonder, what if God doesn't show up? What if God doesn't come through? And he's thinking, like many of us at times have had the thought of I'm trying to hold on, I'm trying to trust, I'm trying to believe, but at what point do I just have to take this into my own hands? Do I have to deal with this myself without God? The interesting thing about this question of where is God is it's a question that we usually ask under a specific set of circumstances. We don't usually ask this question when life is going well, right? Like when life is going well, we're not like, God, where are you? My life is going so well, right? It's typically when life is hard. And when life is hard, maybe somebody in our life that is important to us that we love is sick. Maybe a relationship has ended. Maybe we are in financial hard times and we're wondering where God is and is God going to provide for us? We're trying to make a major life decision, and so we're trying to discern, God, what do you want me to do? Where are you? Why aren't you speaking into this? Maybe something in our life fails. Maybe it's a career choice that we've made that hasn't worked out the way that we thought. Maybe it's a marriage ending. Maybe it is a major risk that we took, and it didn't turn out the way that we hoped that it would. Maybe it's when we see injustice and poverty and wondering, God, where are you? And so this morning, I want to talk through a few things to remember when we're wondering where God is. Things to remember when we find ourselves in that place of wondering, God, where are you? So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 13. I'm going to read through our story here together, beginning in verse 1. It says, Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 42 years over Israel. He chose 3,000 men from Israel for himself. 2,000 men from Israel, 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in Bethel's hill country, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. So Jonathan is Saul's son, so Saul had sent troops with him. He sent the rest of the troops away, each to his own tent. Jonathan attacked the Philistine garrison in Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. So Jonathan, Saul's son, attacks this group of troops in Gibeah, and the Philistines hear about it. And so Saul is going to announce and going to warn people that this has happened. So Saul blew the ram's horn throughout the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. And all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine garrison, and Israel is now repulsive to the Philistines. In other words, Israel has attacked the Philistines, and the Philistines are going to be coming after you. The Philistines are going to be coming after Israel. It says, then the troops were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines also gathered to fight against Israel. 3,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and troops as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Bethaven. The men of Israel saw that they were in trouble because the troops were in a difficult situation. They hid in caves, in thickets, among rocks, and in holes and cisterns. So they're seeing this major army coming against them. They're seeing the chariots and the horsemen, and so they're beginning to hide. They're beginning to run. It says in verse 7, some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. They're fleeing. They're running away. Saul, however, was still at Gilgal, and all his troops were gripped with fear. He waited 7 days for the appointed time that Samuel had set, but Samuel didn't come to Gilgal, and the troops were deserting him. So back in chapter 10, Samuel had sent Saul to this town, Gilgal, and told him to wait 7 days, and then Samuel would come and meet him there. Well, they're on the seventh day, and Samuel has not yet come. And so Saul's troops are beginning to desert him because God is not with them. The prophet has not come and called on God to be with them. And so his men are beginning to desert him. So verse 9, so Saul said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. Then he offered the burnt offering. So Saul went ahead and did it himself. He went and made this offering himself so that he could hopefully regain the morale of his troops and his team. Just as he finished offering the burnt offering, Samuel arrived. So Saul went out to greet him. And Samuel asked, what have you done? Saul answered, when I saw the troops were deserting me and you didn't come within the appointed days and the Philistines were gathering at Michmash, I thought, the Philistines will now descend on me at Gilgal, and I haven't sought the Lord's favor. So I forced myself to offer the burnt offering. So Samuel's like, what have you done? What have you done? And Samuel's like, well, my men were deserting me. The Philistines were descending. And so I needed to seek the Lord's favor. I forced myself to do what you were going to do. Samuel said to Saul, you have been foolish. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. It was at this time that the Lord would have permanently established your reign over Israel. But now your reign will not endure. The Lord has found a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people, because you have not done what the Lord commanded. So at the center of this story is essentially Saul has gone forward and performed this offering that only Samuel, as the prophet, as the representative of God, was supposed to offer. Samuel, as the representative of God in this moment, is supposed to be the one who comes and officially calls on God to be with Saul and his men. But Saul, feeling the pressure of Samuel not coming and feeling the pressure of his troops deserting him and feeling the pressure of the Philistines coming, goes and makes this offering himself. And in response to this, Samuel tells Saul that he will lose his kingship. And you're like, that feels a bit harsh. That feels a bit drastic. I mean, he made an offering, for goodness sake. Like, isn't that at least somewhat pleasing to the Lord that he made an offering? And yet he is losing his kingship because Samuel seemed to be running late. What's going on here? Why does he lose his kingship over this? Well, what's going on here is Saul, in this moment, feeling the pressure of this moment, thought that this was just about, how do I win the battle today? How do I win the battle that's right in front of me? How do I not lose my troops who are deserting me? What he didn't realize, what he didn't understand, was that what was really at stake was his kingship, because in this moment, what was being revealed is the kind of king Saul would be. The question that's being put to Saul in this moment is, when the pressure is on, when your men are deserting you, when the Philistines are coming, when the prophet is not here, when the odds are against you, when it seems like the walls are falling down around you, where are you going to place your trust? And what's revealed in this moment is, when the pressure is on, Saul is going to trust himself. He's going to take control of it himself, and he's going to trust himself. And what's so condemning about this is Saul knew the stories of God showing up in Israel's past, that them being immensely underdogged in these fights, and God showing up and confusing these massive armies so that they fight against one another and defeat themselves. Israel doesn't even have to fight those battles. God fights it for them. Saul knew these stories. He knew that if God said he was going to show up, he would show up. And yet in this moment, he He chooses to trust himself. And so what's revealed is that when the pressure is on, this king is going to look to escape from the pressure by hitting an escape hatch. He's going to find a way out of the pressure. And the way out of the pressure for him was to take his trust off of God and to take control himself, because that felt a lot safer. That felt a lot more secure for him to be in control. The pressure was mounting. Samuel wasn't showing up. Troops are deserting. And so he thought, surely it's okay to make this sacrifice, right? Like, surely it's okay for me to go ahead and do this. And he takes it into his own hands and hits the escape hatch. And I want to know for you, when you find yourself in a moment under immense pressure, the odds are against you, you're overwhelmed, what's your escape hatch? What's the outlet that you run to when pressure is building and you can't take it anymore and you just need to run to something to release the pressure? What is it that you run to? What makes it even more difficult is that, like Saul, many of us have a story about why our escape hatch is okay. We have a story that we tell ourselves about why it's okay to hit that escape hatch. I mean, Saul, it says, his troops are deserting him, but I love how he even turns this on Samuel, and he's like, you weren't coming. This is your fault. And so I forced myself to make the offering. Right? He has a story about why it was okay to hit the escape hatch. What is your escape hatch? One of the major ones that we've seen an uptick in since the pandemic has been the use of substances as an escape. Pain medication, tranquilizers, alcohol, substances that we use as an escape from the pressure. And we may even have a story that we tell ourselves about why it's okay to hit that escape hatch. About why we're using our medication the way that we're using it. About the amount that we are consuming. And so maybe for you it's a substance. I think right now more than any other time, I don't know this, but the statistics seem to be pointing in this direction that more and more of us are depending on some kind of substance to get us through the day, to get us through life. That we're finding ourselves running at a pace of life that it's either we choose to stop and slow down or we medicate in order to keep going. Maybe for you, the escape hatch is some form of retail therapy. That we push out the pressure with the excitement of a new purchase. And the story that we tell ourselves is, I deserve this. Because of what I've been through, I deserve this. And all the while, we're racking up more and more debt. Maybe your escape hatch is pornography. You just need a minute for your mind to be hijacked by something so that you're not thinking about the pressure that you're under, the pain that you're feeling. Maybe it's something less drastic. Maybe it's just binging a whole lot of TV, right? There's nothing wrong with TV. There's nothing wrong with a good movie. When I was talking with my counselor and we were talking through like healthy coping mechanisms for stress and pressure, I talked about how one for me has been Marvel movies. I don't know how many times through the pandemic I've watched all the Marvel movies, like all 20,000 of them, right? And, she's like, okay, if you want to sit down and watch a Marvel movie to, let off some pressure, that's great. But if you're sitting down watching 6 of them, there might be room for a conversation here. The challenge with Saul's escape hatch, what makes his escape hatch especially tricky, is the fact that he is able to cloak it in such spiritual terms. The fact that it is so spiritual, he could easily say, like, you didn't come, and so I forced myself to make the offering. And as followers of Jesus, as people who consider ourselves in touch with God's Spirit, we have to be careful about this. We have to be careful about finding spiritual terms and language and justifications for our escape hatches. One of the escape hatches I think that's been prevalent in the church over the last 2 years, and granted, I want to be clear, there are legitimate reasons to leave a church. Maybe there is abuse happening. There is unbiblical things being taught, problematic things being taught. Maybe it just is not the church that's serving, a part of your family in some capacity. I don't know, but I think one of the escape hatches over the last couple of years for us as people of faith is just to leave our church. That we reach a hard point in our church, and rather than leaning into the challenge of it, rather than realizing maybe there's something I can learn from this hard season, learn from this disagreement, learn from this tension, we hit the escape hatch and go find a different place. And again, there are legitimate reasons for making that change, but I want to say if you are here this morning and you are visiting us, I want you to really do some internal work of assessing, have we just come to visit this church and considering leaving our church as an escape hatch from something hard that we need to stay and we need to endure and we need to learn what it is that we need to learn from this season. With Saul and his story, his kingship, if you go back a few weeks, we realized it was something that was not anything that he deserved or earned. There was nothing about him. There was nothing about his military victories of any sort that said, this is the guy. This is who deserves to be king. It was God selected him to step into this role. And yet somewhere along the line, in his time, this became about him, right? For him to lose this battle wouldn't have just been reflecting on God. It would have been reflecting on him as a military leader. It would have been a reflection on his identity, his value, his ability. And so he had to seize control of this moment to relieve the pressure of potentially failing and looking bad. And so it appears to be this spiritual thing, but in reality, it was his way of relieving the pressure of this moment. For me, when we were called to plant a church, I thought, man, that is crazy. There is no way that's going to work, no way that's going to happen. I'm going to fail. We're going to fail. This isn't going to work out. But it became clear that this is what God wanted us to do. And so I reached a point where it was like, okay, God, if this happens, it's purely because of you. Not because of anything that I've done or can do. It's because you have shown up to do this. But if I'm being honest with you, somewhere along the way, I began to feel the pressure of, okay, God's done his part, but now if it fails, it's going to reflect negatively on me. I'm going to look bad. And so I began to seize control. I began to push out other people on our team's ideas because I was afraid that if we implement this idea, it's going to fail and it's not going to work out. And so I was seizing control as a way of ensuring that it wasn't going to fail. And so it appears godly. It has this appearance of godliness, but really it was driven by a fear of failure. And so as we find ourselves in moments where we're asking, where is God? Why hasn't God shown up? Why am I under this pressure? When is God going to come and rescue me from this moment? There's a few things that I want you to remember. The first thing I want you to remember is that pressure exposes what's inside of us. That it's easy to put on a good front when everything is going easy. When it's easy to demonstrate great faith when it doesn't take a lot of faith. When life doesn't take a lot of faith. When we aren't up against a lot of challenges. But when the pressure is on, then what is inside of us gets pressed out. And with Saul under pressure, what gets pushed out, what is exposed is his self-reliance, his dependence on himself. And so what happens when we're under pressure, a part of what God is doing in that moment is revealing to us what's inside of us, helping us to see what's inside of us. And sometimes the hardest part of that is accepting what's coming out of us when we're under pressure and realizing some transformation has to happen. Something's got to change. The second thing to remember when we find ourselves asking where is God is to know that God has not abandoned us. There is something he wants us to learn. That in this moment, God hasn't abandoned us. There's just something that he wants us to learn because of the season and place that we're in. To kind of illustrate this a little bit, one of the best ways I know how to do this is as parents. I'm sure we're not the only ones, but as parents, we feel like one of our responsibilities to our kids is to form them as children who conduct themselves responsibly and respect others and use their manners, right? We want them to conduct themselves with respect and responsibility. And so a couple of weeks ago, we're sitting at breakfast in our kitchen, and we're eating waffles, and out of nowhere, Sadie goes, "Where's my fork?" And we're like, start over, And she's like, "Give me a fork." And we're like, "Yeah, that's not it. That's not it. You're going to need to try again." And she's like, "I need a fork. Give me a fork." And we're like, "Sadie, just ask politely, just say please." And she said, "I am starving. Give me a fork." And we're like, "Sadie, there's a very simple solution to this. All you have to do is ask nicely. That's all we're asking." And then she gets really personal. She's like, "I am starving. Don't you care about me? Don't you care that I'm starving?" We're like, "Sadie, yes, we care, but there's a very simple solution," right? And in this moment, it would be easy to cave because we don't want her to think we don't care about her, think we're not here for her, that we're not interested in her well-being, right? But at some point, there's a process of learning that has to happen in this. And so finally, after, this going on for a little too long, she gives the quietest, most distorted, she's like, "I'll say it, but it's not going to be satisfying for you," okay? But for us, letting her sit in that place of "I'm starving to death, don't you care about me," is there's a bigger picture of we want to form you into the kind of kid that doesn't wake up in the morning asking, "Where's my fork?" And sometimes for God, it's not just, how do I rescue them from the pain of this moment? For God, the question is, how does the crucible of this moment form them into the kind of people that can endure this kind of pain? Because we follow a crucified Savior. And what that means is, at some point, the fact that we follow a crucified Savior means that pain is going to come on us. That at some point, walking this path is going to be painful. For God, maybe the question is, how do I form them into the kind of people who learn to avoid the same missteps that got them here in the first place? Maybe we find ourselves in a situation, in a place, in a season that we are somewhat responsible for. And for God to just pluck us out of that, we miss out on learning, how do we not get here again? How do we learn not to ever want to be in this place again? Maybe God's asking, how do I help her learn the emotional warning signs so she slows down and gets help before she's at this place again? How do I help him learn that his escape hatch is not worth the damage it will cause his marriage and his relationship with his kids? There are things that we need to learn, and the stakes of life are too high not to learn them now. Learn them in this season. And so what might your current circumstances be teaching you? That if God just if you just pull the escape hatch, you will miss out on learning? What might your circumstances be teaching you that if you just pull out now, just pull the escape hatch now, you're not going to learn? And then the last thing that I want you to remember, and this is maybe the hardest part about this, is that it's not always possible to give a rational explanation to why God is not showing up. I wish it was something where in every instance we could say, this is exactly why God's not showing up here. But the truth is, especially as we're in it, we can't always know. It's not always possible to know. We can't know the mind of God. But this morning, we are going to participate in the very practice that Jesus gave us for these moments when we question what God is up to. This practice of communion, of breaking bread together. Communion is the corporate body of Christ testifying to the world and testifying to itself. We are testifying to ourselves, to one another as the body of Christ, that God has not abandoned us, but that he gave it all for us. And that when Jesus wanted his Father to just pluck him out of the moment of his pain, right? In the Garden of Gethsemane, when he is sweating blood and crying out for this cup to be taken from him, for him to be plucked out of this pain, that when Jesus wanted his Father to do that, God had bigger plans. He had resurrection plans. And the only path to resurrection was through crucifixion. And so communion reminds us that we would be lost if Jesus had hit the escape hatch. That even if we can't give rational explanation to why God is not showing up, to know that he has not abandoned us because he didn't pull the escape hatch when it most counted. And so we're going to take communion together. I want the band to come up as we prepare to do this. And one of the most challenging parts of this story in 1 Samuel this week is that Samuel had told Saul to wait 7 days. And it seems that Saul waited into the 7th day, but he didn't wait till the end of the 7th day. He got impatient. And he gave up, and he took care of it himself. He took it into his own hands. Meaning Saul gave up just short of Samuel showing up. And the truth is, if he would have just held on a little bit longer, if he would have held on just a little bit longer, he would have experienced the profound faithfulness of God. That God is never late. I don't know how long you're going to have to hold on. I don't know how hard the work is that you're going to need to do. There's no way for me to know. But don't give up as God is coming over the hill. The stakes are just too high for that. So I want to encourage you. Maybe you find yourself in a place this morning of, I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I don't know how much longer I can keep learning the things that I need to learn. And so I want to remind you of this truth from Ephesians chapter 1. Paul is talking to the Ephesians and he writes, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead. And I know maybe today you're thinking, I can't hold on any longer. I'm not strong enough. And what I want you to know is that if you are a follower of Jesus, you have the same power in you that God used to raise Jesus from the dead. And you can hold on and you can keep holding on because it will never leave you and never forsake you. And so as we take this together, as we take this meal together, we are testifying that regardless of what's coming in my future, I know resurrection is coming and I have the power of his Spirit to sustain me through it. So I want to invite you to open your cup, to take your bread. As we reflect back on that night when Jesus was betrayed and knowing what was coming, he took that bread and he still proclaimed to his disciples that this bread is my body, which will be broken for you. And he took the cup on the night that he would sweat his own blood, be under such pressure that he's perspiring the very thing that he would pour out for us. He said to his disciples, this represents the blood of the new covenant, which will be poured out for the sins of many. Will you join me as we worship together the God who will never leave us or forsake us?